And welcome to today's Verified Live. We start in Washington, where Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is preparing to address the joint houses of Congress in a few hours' time amid protests over his handling of the war in Gaza. On his first trip since the devastating attack by Hamas on October the 7th, Mr. Netanyahu has said that he'll be seeking to consolidate bipartisan support for Israel, but several US lawmakers have said they won't attend. In a statement, the number 2 ranking Democrat in the Senate, Dick Durbin, said, "I will stand by Israel, but I will not stand and cheer its current Prime Minister." Well, protests against Mr. Netanyahu's visit started last night. Hundreds of Jewish demonstrators staging a sit-in at the Capitol to protest against the war in Gaza. Those people were later removed by police. So let's go back live to Capitol Hill, live to Katrina Perry, who is there for us. And we've seen more and more protesters gathering quite close to where you are. I know you're going to talk to Tom Bateman, our correspondent, who's among them in a moment or two. So aside from all of that, tell me a little more about the raw politics of what we're going to get a little later in Congress.
Well, this is a very divisive issue here in the US. Obviously, President Biden standing so strongly and so squarely beside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over these past months since those October 7th attacks. But his support is not universally welcomed, not even within his own party, where there isn't unity. Somewhere between 30 and 50 Democratic lawmakers will boycott this speech today. You mentioned Dick Durbin. Well, the only Democrat that's senior to him is Chuck Schumer. He has said he will be there, but very many of his colleagues won't, many of them holding counter events, rallies and joining the protests themselves, opposed to how Prime Minister Netanyahu is handling this. And there are those who are protesting because they want a stronger position in terms of getting the hostages home, and those who are protesting because they want more done for the Palestinian people in Gaza, making the point to President Biden that he should tell Prime Minister Netanyahu that the war is against Hamas and not the Palestinian people.
A twin question here, because after the events of Sunday, is there likely to be much greater behind-the-scenes pressure to get Benjamin Netanyahu to sign up to that ceasefire deal? And a broader thought too, because right at the start, October the 7th, America absolutely in lockstep with Israel. There has been a subtle shift. The longer this war has gone on, the way that Israel has executed the war with increasing concern. Just tell me about both those elements.
Indeed. Well, firstly, President Biden obviously not seeking re-election. That changes the calculation for him personally and how he will now approach his relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who he will meet at the White House tomorrow. It now becomes even more personal than it ever was for Joe Biden. He has a legacy that he needs to protect now. He has only a couple of months left as president. He doesn't want to be seen as a lame duck president, and this is absolutely one of the goals that he would like to deliver upon before he leaves office in January. A proud Zionist, he's spent so much of his career standing close to Israel and particularly with Prime Minister Netanyahu, but we have seen that relationship change and shift in recent months here. In the aftermath of October 7th, President Biden obviously travelling to Israel, that embrace with Netanyahu there. And I can tell you here in the US, there was almost zero coverage of what was actually happening in Gaza. The groundswell of support was very much towards Israel. That has shifted over the past months, and now there is a growing and significant public anger in this country at what is happening in Gaza and the death toll and the continuing horrific humanitarian crisis. So we're seeing protesters here today who are coming for a whole variety of reasons. And we can cross over now to my colleague correspondent Tom Bateman, who is down behind me somewhere here in the middle of the protests. Tom, can you describe the scene for us where you are?
Katrina, yeah, I mean, we got here about half an hour ago, and in that time, many hundreds more protesters have arrived. Speeches from the stage just getting underway in the last 10 minutes. One speaker talking about tens of thousands of people killed, he said, by Benjamin Netanyahu. What the protesters say they want to do here is carry out, they say, a citizen's arrest against Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, clearly, they're not going to be able to get anywhere near him. If you look this way, you can see the dome of the Capitol building in the distance here. I just took a walk up the path here. There are, at this point, huge barricades, dozens of police. They've tried to put effectively a ring of steel around the Capitol building. There was a van pulling up just as I walked up there, and boxes of cuffs, those plastic cuffs to cuff people, being pulled out. So already I think they're anticipating the possibility or the potential for trouble here later. But at the moment, as you can see, things are extremely calm and people peacefully protesting. The organisers talked about wanting to get tens of thousands of people to come to Washington today. Certainly buses were being laid on from cities all over the East Coast, so the potential for a very, very large turnout as people tried to make their voices heard. But crucially, as they get to the heart of American democracy here, their path is going to be blocked as we get into the hours towards Mr. Netanyahu's speech.
And Tom, talk to us a little bit about the people who are already there. What are they saying to you about the reason for coming here today to protest while the Prime Minister is speaking?
Well, overwhelmingly in this protest and others, they've had recently that we've covered, people talk about wanting to protest against Israel's military offensive in Gaza and the scale of the numbers of civilians killed by the Israeli offensive. That's fundamentally one of the first reasons that's often quoted. Many of the banners here are also about US military aid for Israel. That's an absolutely fundamental issue, not just in the protests outside, but of course, Katrina, as you were mentioning, the many Democrats, it seems, that will boycott the speech by Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel receives $3.8 billion worth of US military assistance per year, historically, cumulatively, the biggest recipient of American military aid historically, and that has been one of the fundamental grievances, particularly among Democrats, that they have tried to push Joe Biden to change tack on, to change course. And there's only been that one moment where a consignment of 2,000-pound bombs were held back by the Americans to the Israelis. The administration said at that point that that was over the fact that they had such a huge impact in densely built areas in Gaza. Now, some of that consignment, the 500-pound bombs, were since allowed to flow again. But that key point, that relationship of military assistance has not budged under Joe Biden, although he himself has talked about indiscriminate bombing by the Israelis in Gaza. But he has very much been frustrated, exasperated by his inability to cajole Benjamin Netanyahu to switch course fundamentally over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Okay, Tom, thanks for that. It is obviously very loud where you are, so thanks for bringing us that. We will speak to you a little later on. Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech will take place here behind me at the Capitol just a couple of hours from now, and he is expected to use that speech to speak to a number of audiences, obviously the domestic audience here in the US and the lawmakers who ultimately have control over various funding votes of support, military support to Israel. But he's also going to be addressing the domestic audience back in Israel. Before he boarded the plane to fly here earlier in the week, he himself was subject to many protests in Israel. It's the first time he's left the country since those October 7th attacks, and there is a groundswell of public feeling there against what the Prime Minister is doing to get those hostages back to Israel who continue to be held by Hamas in Gaza.